Hello and welcome to Cliff Reviews Art House. This time I'm reviewing the film Blitz, directed by Steve McQueen. So this is a film set principally in London at the time of the Blitz in World War II. We've got a very powerful opening with the chaos of firefighting after a bombing raid. And then the picture kind of degrades and goes into these patterns, and then it comes into this field of flowers. Steve McQueen is an artist, and I just found this sequence really exciting and effective from a feature film point of view. But then, kind of this sequence, there was a real poetry in it. There was some beauty even amongst the chaos, I think, and I really admire Steve McQueen as an artist, and he is a real artist, and I think that is reflected in all of his films, including this one. To be honest, however, I'm not really sure that this kind of poetic sensibility really works in this film. I didn't feel it was kind of as weighty as I might have expected from him. Overall, the film has a real feeling of a children's film. I think they worked hard to make sure that it had a 12A certificate. It does have certain adult things in it, but this is a film that children can go and see. And I think that actually this is a worthwhile aspiration because it is an excellent film. It's really well made. And I suspect that for children, it's educationally really, really useful, emotionally useful for showing children what it would have been like in the Blitz. I mean, I think it is important that we all have a sense of what that period must have been like. And you know, there's a lot about children being evacuated. Again, that's good for in kind of an educational way. And the chaos of what London was like during bombings. So as a kind of film that can be enjoyed by the family and, you know, maybe watched in schools by children and discussed in lessons, I think is really excellent. But as a feature film for me, I just found it a little bit lightweight. With one exception, I think there was a good representation of the intimacy between a parent and a child. We have several scenes at the beginning which are brief but really highlight the love that exists between the mum, the main character mum, Rose, and the boy, George. I particularly really liked, it's quite a short scene, but the scene where the two of them were lying on a bed and they were drumming and playing with each other. It was just really authentic and real. The other thing I really liked in that kind of sequence before George gets sent off, before he gets evacuated, where there's a shot from under the bed where we know he's about to be told that he's going to be evacuated, and we just see his legs dangling over the side of the bed from under the bed. I just found this a really emotive shot, really. But aside from that little bit of depth and intimacy, I found the film really emotionally one-dimensional. It definitely keeps it simple. And, you know, I think that works to its favor in ensuring that it's a film that children will be engaged with. But I think it's a lot harder for it to be an effective children's film and satisfy an adult audience as well. I do think it's a successful film, but I would say I think I've seen all of his films, and it's definitely the weakest of his films. I don't want to be too critical about it because I do admire it. It's really well made. He does have the sensitivity of an artist, so actually I did like the way it was shot. I did like some of the sequences. And I think it's excellent for children. In terms of a child viewer, it's really edgy and raw, and I really like that. I mentioned that the bit of depth in it was between the mother Rose, played by Saoirse Ronan, and her son George, played by Elliot Heffernan. And I thought they were really convincing. It did feel really authentic. But as I say, such limited emotional depth. I don't think, I think Saoirse Ronan is an amazing actor, but this is very different than her other film this year, Outrun, where she really had much more opportunity to show her talent as an actor. There's plenty of interesting cameos. Paul Weller's in this film, Stephen Graham, Harris Dickinson, Kathy Burke. I did have the feeling that they're all a little bit wasted, perhaps. Maybe not Paul Weller. Paul Weller has a little bit more than a cameo. He's the grandfather, and yeah, I enjoyed his performance. But again, this is, if it's made principally for a younger audience, I don't think a, a, a younger audience will have any clue who these actors were. As in all of Steve McQueen's work, there is a sensitivity to marginalized perspectives. And so in this film, there are multiple examples from the point of view of the struggles and the contributions during the war of Black communities. There are many obvious points made in this film about race and about class. George has a white British mother and a West Indian father who's no longer around. And so the film does address some serious issues in terms of the way that George is treated. He experiences various incidents of racism. And also we learn about what happened to George's father. And he had a very upsetting incident where he was picked on and he ended up being arrested and jailed. And that seems to be the way in which this family got split up. The film also addresses issues of class, because obviously if you had money, you could build a bomb shelter in your own garden. But for many people in the city, they didn't have access to a bomb shelter. And there was an issue around access to tube stations, and there's quite a lot around this. The tube stations ended up being used as bomb shelters, but in the film we learned that at first they were closed, and it's a little bit like in the film Titanic, where the people down in the lower decks were kind of caged in. It felt a little bit like that. Although this does contain a lot of political points, as all of Steve McQueen's work does, it is very nuanced. I mean, I do react strongly against political points in films that are just too clunky, but this never felt didactic. It never felt tokenistic. It felt like an authentic part of the story. And also, I do think, although perhaps you could say that some of the points were a little bit obvious, given that I think that this film was aimed to be fully accessible to children. I think actually they're really well handled. As I say, I think this film, I could imagine this film being a really useful piece for getting some classroom discussion going on many of the issues raised in the film. You could call this quite an action film. There are some big set piece action sequences. We see explosions, we see planes crashing into buildings. I think that this looks good, and again, in terms of being an effective children's film, it kind of is exciting to watch. There is an overhead shot of London at one point from very high, and we just see London smouldering, and the camera slightly glides forward. And this reminded me of an artwork by Steve McQueen, which was recently shown at the Serpentine Gallery. It was a film about the Grenfell disaster, and it was a shot from a helicopter that basically flew from outside of London into London towards what was left of the Grenfell Tower. That, of course, was just a burnt out shell in this film. And I did just wonder if he was making a little nod towards that. But I really like the way that Blitz was filmed and the kind of action war sequences of it. There's a lot of singing in this film, so much so that I did wonder if you might even call it a musical. It's not a musical. All of the songs are kind of just part of the story. It's people singing, and it kind of taps into the idea of of how people sung to keep their spirits high, and these some of these famous war songs that that people sang. So I think that, you know, they're definitely part of the story rather than being musical numbers as such. But there is a lot of music and singing in it. Overall, this film is very watchable. I did enjoy it. I do think it's probably about 30 minutes too long. It's 2 hours. I think it only needed to be 90 minutes. There are times when the film does drift. It's a very simple story, and I think it could be told within 90 minutes. The real positive of this film is that I think it's accessible to children. It's educational. It could be used in schools. I think families could sit down and watch it. The negative of this film for me is that it was superficial and a bit surface level. I would have liked more emotional depth. It's definitely not his best film, but would I recommend it? Overall, yes, especially if you're going to watch it with children. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.